May 11, 1960. On a dimly lit, dirt-paved street in San Fernando, an industrial suburb of Buenos Aires, a bus routinely brings workers home from their factory shifts. A man steps off into the chilly evening air, holding a small flashlight to guide his steps down Garibaldi Street. He lives in a modest, half-finished brick house with no running water and no electricity. To his neighbors, he is Ricardo Klement, a quiet, unpretentious mechanic working at a local Mercedes-Benz plant. He lives an utterly mundane, unremarkable life. But beneath this harmless facade hides one of the most sought-after fugitives in human history. Ricardo Klement was actually Adolf Eichmann, the SS Obersturmbannführer who served as the chief organizational architect of the Holocaust. He was the man who oversaw the logistics, train schedules, and deportation protocols that funneled millions to their deaths. When World War II collapsed in 1945, Eichmann vanished into the chaotic underbelly of Europe. Utilizing a network of underground ratlins aided by forged documents and sympathetic foreign conduits, he escaped to Argentina in 1950 under a fake Red Cross passport. Argentina, under the regime of Juan Perón, had become a haven for fleeing Nazi officials, offering them sanctuary, new names, and complete legal immunity. For a decade, Eichmann believed his past was buried forever. He was wrong. Thousands of miles away in Tel Aviv, Israel's fledgling intelligence agency, the Mossad, was quietly mapping out a global search matrix. But the breakthrough didn't come from a high-level government informant or a satellite intercept. It came from a blind man living in Buenos Aires. Lothar Hermann, a German Jewish Holocaust survivor who had lost his sight to Nazi beatings, was living in Argentina when his teenage daughter, Sylvia, began dating a young man named Klaus. Klaus boasted openly about his father's wartime authority and expressed fierce anti-Semitic views. When Sylvia brought Klaus to her home, Lothar listened intently to the young man's last name, Eichmann. Recognizing the name instantly, Lothar sent a coded alert to West German prosecutor Fritz Bauer, who secretly forwarded the intelligence directly to the Director General of the Mossad, Isser Harel. Harel knew that filing a formal extradition request with the Argentine government would be disastrous. Corrupt officials inside Buenos Aires law enforcement would immediately leak the warrant, allowing Eichmann to vanish deeper into South America. Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion gave Isser Harel a single classified mandate: do not ask for extradition. Find him, capture him, and bring him to Israel alive to face public trial. In early 1960, elite Mossad interrogators V.A. Haroni arrived in Buenos Aires under a false identity. Operating with a concealed camera built into a leather briefcase, A. Haroni spent weeks conducting surveillance on the remote house on Garibaldi Street. He watched the target tend to his garden, catch the bus, and return home at precisely the same minute every evening. On March 21, 1960, A. Haroni captured the ultimate confirmation. The target brought home a bouquet of flowers, and his wife greeted him at the door in formal dress. It was their 25th wedding anniversary. The ghost had been positively identified. The trap was about to snap shut. Once positive identification was locked in, Isser Harel mobilized an elite operative unit codenamed the Snatch Team. This was not a military squad, but a collection of highly specialized Mossad operatives, surveillance experts, document forge masters, and medical professionals. Leading the field operation was Rafi Eitan, a brilliant tactical mind who would later become a legend in international espionage. The man tasked with the physical apprehension was Peter Malkin, a martial arts expert whose own family had perished in the Holocaust. The operational plan required absolute stealth. A single gunshot or a messy struggle on a public street would trigger an immediate response from the Argentine police, effectively trapping the operatives inside the country. There could be no weapons drawn, no sirens, and no witnesses. In early May, the operatives began arriving in Buenos Aires individually, utilizing false passports from different European nations. They rented 7 different safehouses across the city, frequently moving vehicles to avoid drawing attention from local neighborhood watchmen. 2 rented cars were designated for the actual abduction, a primary intercept vehicle and a secondary support vehicle positioned to block traffic if things went sideways. On May 11, 1960, the strike team took their positions on Garibaldi Street under the cover of dusk. The weather was cold and rainy. The team pulled up to the side of the road, popping the hood of their car to fake engine trouble. Operatives hovered around the engine bay with flashlights, waiting for the 7:45 p.m. bus to arrive. 7:45 came and went. The bus did not appear. Tension inside the intercept vehicle reached a boiling point. If Eichmann had changed his route or taken a different shift, the operation would be compromised, as idling a stalled vehicle on a quiet residential street for too long would invite local police questioning. By 8 p.m., the operatives debated pulling the plug and aborting for the night. Then at 8 minutes past 8, the headlights of the local bus cut through the darkness. A solitary figure stepped down from the platform, buttoning his raincoat and turning on his pocket flashlight. It was Ricardo Klement. Peter Malkin stepped out of the shadow of the open car hood. As Eichmann walked past the stalled vehicle, Malkin uttered the only Spanish phrase he had memorized for the mission. "Momentito, señor." "Just a moment, sir." Eichmann paused, instinctively reaching into his pocket. In a flash, Malkin lunged forward, grabbing Eichmann by the shoulders and wrestling him to the muddy embankment. Before Eichmann could scream, 3 other operatives piled out of the car, pinning his limbs and shoving a heavy gag into his mouth. Within 24 seconds of stepping off the bus, Eichmann was thrown into the footwell of the back seat, covered with a heavy blanket and driven away into the dark Argentine night. The intercept car tore down the unlit highways of suburban Buenos Aires, navigating toward a pre-selected Mossad safehouse codenamed Villa Tira. Inside the vehicle, Peter Malkin kept his gloved hand firmly over Eichmann's mouth, checking his waist for concealed explosives or cyanide capsules. The target did not fight back. He sat shivering in the footwell, breathing heavily through his nose. Upon arrival at the villa, the team moved Eichmann to an upstairs bedroom. He was stripped, searched, and examined by Dr. Yona Elian, an Israeli anesthesiologist brought along specifically to manage the target's physical condition. The doctor confirmed the target had a distinct scar on his thigh and a faded tattoo under his left armpit, the unmistakable mark of an SS officer's blood group designation. When Zvi Aharoni stepped into the room to conduct the initial interrogation in German, he addressed the target directly. "What is your name?" At first, the captive maintained his cover identity, insisting in a trembling voice that he was Ricardo Klement, a simple clerk from Germany. Aharoni pressed harder, laying out known dates, family names, and internal SS service numbers. Finally, realizing the game was over, the prisoner dropped his head and whispered his real identity. "Ich bin Adolf Eichmann." "I am Adolf Eichmann." The operatives were now faced with a grueling logistical nightmare. Due to diplomatic scheduling, the Israeli official delegation plane, an El Britannia airliner brought to Argentina for the country's 150th independence celebrations, was not scheduled to depart Buenos Aires for another 9 days. For 9 continuous days and nights, the Mossad team held Eichmann prisoner in that isolated suburban bedroom. Strict security protocols were enforced inside the safehouse. Operatives were forbidden from speaking to Eichmann in anything above a whisper, and at least 2 guards remained inside the room at all times, sitting in total silence with their eyes locked on the prisoner. Outside the safehouse, a massive storm was brewing. Eichmann's family, alongside local Nazi sympathizers and underground fascist groups, realized he was missing. They alerted local police and began searching hospitals, morgues, and border checkpoints, circulating a police sketch of a suspicious man seen in the area. Argentine police stepped up road patrols and airport surveillance, threatening to blow the entire operation wide open before the El Al flight could even land. During these long days of isolation, Peter Malkin engaged in psychological conversations with Eichmann. While other agents refused to look at the man who had organized the destruction of their families, Malkin offered him cigarettes and listened to him speak. Eichmann disavowed personal malice, repeatedly painting himself as a mere bureaucrat, a cog in a vast administrative machine who was simply following orders and managing train schedules. Before transporting him out of the country, Prime Minister Ben-Gurion insisted on a legal requirement. Eichmann had to sign a written statement confirming he was leaving Argentina voluntarily to stand trial in Israel. Through patient psychological maneuvering, Malkin finally convinced Eichmann to put pen to paper, securing his signature on the voluntary consent document. Now the Mossad faced. On the night of May 20, 1960, the operation reached its critical breaking point. At Ezeiza International Airport, the special El Britannia aircraft sat illuminated on the tarmac, surrounded by Argentine airport personnel and security guards. The flight crew, led by veteran Israeli pilots, had been informed that a member of their team had suffered a sudden nervous breakdown during their stay in Buenos Aires and needed to be returned to Israel under medical supervision. At the safehouse, Dr. Yona Elian carefully administered a calculated dose of tranquilizers to Eichmann. The medication sedated him just enough to keep him dazed, compliant, and unable to speak, while leaving him able to stand and walk with assistance. Operatives dressed Eichmann in a crisp, tailored El Al flight crew uniform, complete with an official pilot jacket, cap, and fake identity papers. To anyone watching from a distance, he appeared to be an exhausted airline officer being helped along by his fellow crew members after drinking a bit too much during their layover. 2 vehicles pulled up to the airport terminal. Operatives stepped out first, engaging the Argentine customs guards with friendly conversation and official paperwork. Then came the key moment. Supported on either side by Peter Malkin and Isser Harel, Eichmann shuffled slowly through the customs checkpoint. His head dropped slightly, his eyes half closed beneath his pilot cap. When a customs officer paused to glance at the dazed man, a Mossad operative casually remarked in fluent Spanish that the navigator had taken a heavy fall and was feeling unwell. The officer waved them through. The team boarded the aircraft and carried Eichmann directly to first-class seats, strapping him in securely. But the danger was far from over. Mechanical delays and last-minute cargo paperwork held the aircraft on the tarmac for hours. Every minute that ticked by increased the risk that local police would discover the abandoned safehouse or receive a radio tip from the surrounding neighborhood. Finally, at midnight on May 21, 1960, the Britannia's engines roared to life. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted off into the dark sky, clearing Argentine airspace before local authorities even realized Adolf Eichmann had vanished from South America. The LL airliner touched down at Lod Airport near Tel Aviv on May 22, 1960. As the cabin doors opened, Isser Harel stepped onto the tarmac to confirm to Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion that the architect of the Holocaust was officially in Israeli custody. On May 23, Prime Minister Ben-Gurion stood before a stunned Knesset, the Israeli parliament. In a brief, electrifying announcement broadcast nationwide, he stated simply, "Adolf Eichmann is already in the country under arrest, and will shortly be placed on trial in Israel." The news sent shockwaves across the globe, capturing international headlines and sparking intense diplomatic friction between Israel and Argentina over sovereign airspace violations. In April 1961, the trial of Adolf Eichmann began in Jerusalem before a panel of 3 Israeli judges. Unlike secret intelligence operations, this trial was broadcast publicly across world television networks. Eichmann sat inside a specially constructed bulletproof glass booth, facing over 100 Holocaust survivors who took the witness stand to recount the atrocities of the concentration camps. Throughout the proceedings, Eichmann maintained a calm, emotionless demeanor. He presented himself as a law-abiding bureaucrat who harbored no personal hatred toward his victims, arguing that his role was strictly technical and administrative. Political philosopher Hannah Arendt, observing the trial from the courtroom gallery, famously coined the phrase "the banality of evil" to describe how ordinary individuals can commit monstrous acts simply by blindly adhering to institutional duty. On December 15, 1961, the court found Adolf Eichmann guilty of crimes against humanity, crimes against the Jewish people, and war crimes. He was sentenced to death by hanging. On May 31, 1962, at Ramla prison, Adolf Eichmann was executed. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered over the international waters of the Mediterranean Sea, ensuring no physical grave would ever exist to serve as a shrine. Operation Finale remains a masterclass in modern clandestine tradecraft. It demonstrated the capability of a young intelligence agency to project power across continents, track down a phantom, and execute a flawless snatch-and-grab operation without firing a single bullet. For the Mossad, it was not merely a tactical victory. It was a powerful statement to the world that no amount of distance, time, or false identities would ever protect those who commit crimes against humanity.